there were some concerns around the gameplay there of like, does this lead us too close to the path that like PC is now trying to dig itself out of, where we have too much damage and too much burst in the game. Obviously, PC is looking to address that in a future patch. So that's, you know, we just like don't want to have to go down that road. Not that I think Halo Blades by itself puts us there, right? But it's like that there were some concerns that like that pushes us in that direction. Whereas Lethal Tempo, because it's backloaded, doesn't really have risks in that area. Bring Shaco. I see that a lot, actually. A surprising amount. The Shaco players are very dedicated to the Shaco, and I respect that. Kale? What about Kale? You're going to have to... Hydrate? All right. I'm hydrating. Bring Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger would be an interesting one. We'd have to figure out how targeting works for his turrets. Playing against them, not as him. Pet champions is something that we've discussed as like, we would need to change targeting rules probably. Not say that we couldn't do them, but it's like, we'd have to have a good discussion about how the targeting rules work. PTA anytime soon? No. We're definitely not doing PTA with Kraken in the system. I also think Kraken Slayer as a rune is just a better version of PTA, basically. Like, that's really what it is, ultimately. Like, they're very similar, like, in application. Like, they basically have the same space, and I think Kraken is just better. I mean, not to, like, you know, get egotistical about my own design, but it's like, I do just think Kraken Slayer is better, and I think the people who worked on PTA would probably agree with me, right? Like, you know, I've actually talked with some of them. I've talked with some of the runes designers about, like, what I was doing. Because, you know, I worked on Runes Reforged in PC, right? I know these people who made PTA, right? And it's like, I think they're generally, like, the ones that I talked to were in agreement with me pretty much instantly. They're like, yeah, Kraken Slayer as a rune makes a lot more sense than makes a lot more sense than Press the Attack. Will Kraken be true damage? Yes. Kraken is true damage. Kraken is a keystone. It is true damage. It scales with level, AD, and AP. I'm giving you an early spoiler here that hopefully no one gets mad at me about, but it does have an AP ratio. Jungle nerfs coming in 3.2. There are jungle changes. I would not consider the changes to be nerfs overall, but there are definitely changes. Do you like Kled? It's interesting you ask that. I've actually played a very like large amount of Kled in PC. He's one of my more played champions over the past like four-ish years. Like I didn't play him too much before joining Riot, but like when I joined Riot and I left the amateur scene, because like when I played in the amateur scene, it's like you just kind of have to play the meta stuff, right, for PC. And so you spend a lot of time practicing and playing the stuff that's in the meta. And Kled was just obviously not one of those champions. It's like when I joined Riot, I actually played a lot of Kled. And I do quite like him. I do think that, well, there's several reasons here. We would definitely not have the vicious tendencies, the W passive that PC has if we wanted to do Kled in Wild Rift. I also don't know how likely it is we'd ever want to do Kled in Wild Rift. Like, his thematic, unfortunately, just doesn't translate. Like, actually, it's very weird about this. It's like the only champion this is true of. Kled's thematic is like very, like, American, like Western/American centric, right? It's like, and in Europe, the whole idea of the like crazy, crotchety old, like, you know, cantankerous cavalier type deal, like, it's like a super American concept that, you know, it's somewhat westernized, obviously, because you see, like, you know, because American movies, etc. It's like, you know, you see this concept occasionally in like American content, which is seen by a lot of people in the West, but it really doesn't translate to the East. So people, you know, are actually like legitimately like, we got like legit confusion on like Kled surveys and stuff like that about his thematic from people outside, like especially people outside of America, right? Even in like LAS, right? Like people are like, what is this? Like, I don't understand this thematic, which is absolutely hilarious. So I don't know. There's a lot of things wrong with Kled. I think we could do some good work on the design though, like the gameplay stuff. I think there's some good changes that could be made there. Shyvana changes will not come this update. Kraken Slayer is on attack. It is not on hit. Aurelia Q tooltip doesn't say it applies on hit effects. We should fix that. I will note that down. Aurelia Q tooltip doesn't doesn't mention on hits. It definitely should if it doesn't. I will check on that. You proc it every 3 autos. It has no cooldown. Neither Kraken nor Lethal Tempo have a cooldown. It is not max HP percentage. It is flat damage. Will some mini rework come soon as well? I certainly cannot tell you about any mini reworks that we might or might not have. What's on attack and on hit difference? There are some abilities that apply on hit effects. So for example, Ezreal's Mystic Shot is a good example of this. Runon's Hurricane Bolts apply on hit effects, but they are not attacks. So essentially an attack has to be your champion actually attacking, right? So things like Shyvana's Twin Bite, Lucian passive, Akshan double hit passive, those are attacks, right? But secondary effects that just apply on hits, such as Ezreal's Mystic Shot or Fiora's Lunge, etc., those are on hits, right? Like if you're not actually physically attacking. Can you say if the balance patch at the start of 3.2 will be a big one or a small one? Well, I probably can't tell you how much balanced work there is, but you can go look at my Twitter or a Tiny Frogo's Twitter and see that the word count for the patch is over 5,000. So let's just say the patch is not a small one overall. There's actually over 5,000 word count for the patch notes. That was something that Alice posted on Twitter. I suggested that. I thought it was a great idea. She loved it. On hit applies Sheen as well. Yes, that's true. Will Pyke mid be viable and does not have good AP scaling for top and jungle? For the AP scaling on Nautilus, I doubt the AP scaling is that relevant for top and jungle. Maybe for top for Rod of Ages, but I would be surprised if his optimal build in the jungle is Roa. As far as Pyke mid, I've talked about this a little bit, but it's basically the short version here, and you can go back and watch the VOD if you want to hear the longer version, but it's like, the short version is, we have put some levers in place to make sure that Pyke, or to try and be confident that Pyke mid is worse than support. If Pyke mid is better than support, we will nerf it until it's not. The concern here is like the same one that PC has, where in PC, Pyke mid is so much better than support that they can't balance support properly because they're limited by his mid lane power. And that is why PC is so concerned about mid lane Pyke. Also in PC, the gameplay of Pyke mid is absolutely atrocious, so they also don't like it for that reason. Like the gameplay, like the pattern is just terrible, like for the game. Like he just disregards all the fundamental tenets of laning, like the fact that you should care about your CS. So there's like some things about that. But it's like, if Pyke mid is functional, that's not a problem for us. If it is better than support, that's probably something we'd want to address. Since Kraken has no cooldown, do you think it could mean some mages benefit of it over Electrocute? I'm thinking of Annie, for example, where she could use Kraken for the burst and then Kraken again right after. No. It only works on attacks. It does not work on spells, so no. There's no way Annie is taking this Keystone. I think there is 0% chance that this thing is good on Annie at all. If it worked on spells, I think that would be like a different story. But since it doesn't work on spells, there's just no way. How are you today? Instead of sorry we were bombarding you. I mean, if I wasn't prepared to get bombarded, I wouldn't turn the stream on. You know, I know what I'm opting into when I open the stream up. So that's all right. How hard do you think it would be to sneak an entire burrito recipe into the patch notes? Pretty hard, I think. There's a lot of people that go over the patch notes. Maybe if I like put it at the bottom in white text or something, like so such that it wasn't visible, I could sneak it in there. But then it probably wouldn't get translated, so that'd be tough. I do think if I put it in the bottom at white text, I could maybe get away with it for a while. Like maybe a few days. No one would notice. But someone would probably notice the first time they like copy and pasted the whole doc into somewhere else, right? Because I assume they like, paste it somewhere else to do the localization and all that stuff. I don't know exactly how that stuff works because I don't really deal with it directly, but not sure. FizzQ is on hit or on attack. FizzW also. So FizzW like is an on hit effect. I believe FizzQ is an attack, but no, actually it should be an on hit in Wild Rift, I believe. Not 100% sure about that though, actually off the top of my head. It's a good question. I believe it's on hits though. Okay. From internal playtesting, did you see any outliers from the Rune/champion? Give me the plug. I need some free LP. I don't want to give away too much. Like, there are some champions we definitely thought would be stronger than others, but not like we're not going to preemptively touch stuff. So, like, if something is truly like outrageously out of line, we will hotfix it. But you know, let's say it turns out that like, you know, our testing wasn't good enough and like lethal tempo is like crazy, you know, lethal tempo is like 10% better than the other runes or whatever. Or like, I mean, 10% is impossible, but it's like, let's say it's like 5% better than the other runes. We'd probably consider hotfix nerfing it at that point. You know, if something is really, really off, we'll hotfix it. If something is just strong or like maybe a little bit above our bands or whatever, we'll address it in the A patch and worry about it later. So it's definitely possible there'll be some stuff out there. And hey, if you want to experiment and find out what the really strong stuff is and you know, get your fast LP, more power to you. You know, stuff will be off and that's okay. You know, there will definitely be some big balance shakeups here for sure, especially because there are other changes besides the runes in this patch, right? It's like those over 5,000 words in the patch notes. Those are not about nothing, right? There are other changes in this patch that are going to be pretty big, I think. Does building one AP item on auction increases passive magic damage? Like auction passive auto marks enemy and attacking twice the mark. I don't know if it has an AP ratio. I am not sure. It should say in its tooltips if it has an AP ratio on the passive tooltip. I don't know off the top of my head if it has one. Good morning, heads up. Good morning, reported. What's going on? We balance Tryndamere passive with lethal tempo. Yes, we will balance it. If it turns out to be too much, then we will tune around that. Thanks so much for doing these streams and active on Reddit, etc. I'm sure you get a lot of hate for putting yourself out there. It's insanely good for the game. Thank you very much. I mean, you know, it varies from time to time. It also varies from place to place. My Twitter DMs are like an absolute cesspool, so I try not to look at them too often. But generally, the comments I get on stream are quite positive, and like I don't get too much hate mail on Reddit. I've gotten a few, but it's like it's not too bad. But yeah, it's you know, for me it's tolerable. But I will say it definitely causes me to look at my Twitter DMs less often than I could. I have been advised by our comms team to close my DMs, but I haven't done that yet. We'll see. Maybe I'll get there one day. But I leave them open because there's some good stuff that come out of my Twitter DMs too. It's like, it's not all bad. But maybe one day I'll close them. We'll see. Finally, the removal of the pen of Morello. One day I'll get there. One day. Maybe it'll be 3.2, but probably not. Would Lilia be viable for Wild Rift? Yeah, I could definitely see us doing Lilia in Wild Rift. I mean, she doesn't have any like crazy mechanics that would even be difficult for Wild Rift, and she's like a positionally based. She's like a movement positionally based champion that works actually quite well in PC. And since movement and positionals are actually like more compelling in some ways in Wild Rift because of the control system, I think she probably works pretty well in Wild Rift. Does Pyke have the same passive where he can't build health? Yes, he does. Difficult question maybe, but League PC has been struggling to balance Seraphine for mid/support/APC. For Wild Rift, what role is seen as a priority for balance? She's released as mid laner, but I'm curious to see how this idea has evolved. We'll probably be doing some messaging about this soon, but our intention is that long term we want to put her in the support role because that's where people want to play her. Like right now she is significantly better in the mid and APC roles. And that was what she was originally designed for, right? But I think both Wild Rift and PC are in agreement here that like the players want to play her in support. Let's let her be a support, right? Like I know PC has been moving in that direction, and that is something that we on Systems and Balance, and I think on Champions as well, have like all agreed on the Wild Rift side that like, yeah, like look, if this is the way the players want to play her, let's let her be a support. Like let's let her be like a support should be her best role if that's where players really want to play her, right? Because there's nothing wrong with the gameplay of her as a support, right? Like this isn't like a Pyke mid situation where the gameplay is really bad and it's like not something we want to support. It's like the gameplay of Seraphine mid, or sorry, Seraphine support is something we always wanted. But the intention from her design was that she would be better in the carry roles, right? The original design. But I think players have kind of said here with their plays, that isn't like, they don't want the carry version. They want the support version, and that's okay, right? If players want a different version, then we can support that. Now we'll have to see how hard it is to move towards those things, but that is something we'll probably be making some changes for in the future. If Swain ever comes to Wild Rift, you put with him current changes he got on PC. I think that's likely. It seems like the Swain changes in PC have been very successful. I've played it one time, I think, in PC. Yeah, I've played it once. I had a really good time. We'll have to see more like how that turns out. But like, yeah, I suspect we would get the current version. But that would be a better question for like Rogue Fool. But it's like, I suspect, given how successful the current version has been, I think it would be better for us, I believe. But we'll see. I don't know. Let's see. Since Kraken's Lair is not on hit rune, can we have new on hit items one day? Also, can we have Wit's End version of the PC? Both those things are definitely possible. I don't know how likely they are, you know, especially not in the immediate future, but it's like they're definitely possibilities in the future. It's like I'm not saying that we'll never do either of one of those, for sure. Does remake reduce? I don't know how that works. No idea. No clue. Damn it, I love Saramid. Yeah, and like we know that this is going to be a cost, and it's like this isn't to say that we would like gut Seraphine mid or anything like that. It's like we, you know, ideally she would still be functional in mid. It's just the goal here would be make support clearly the best role, which it currently is not, right? Like the goal here wouldn't be like of a larger set of changes of like that. So yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's something that's like it's kind of speculative, right? It's like we haven't, you know, made these changes yet or even like talked about like what those changes would be yet. But that's something we've talked about. Like that's the direction we want to go. What skin are you most looking forward to in patch 3.2? The Nasus one looks really sweet. Do you think Kraken's Lair will work for Xin Zhao? I ran it in testing. I thought it was decent. I'm not sure it was better than other options for Xin Zhao, but or Xin Zhao, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I don't know which way is better. Yeah, I think it's at least decent. And there probably are games where it's the best option. But I'm not sure it's actually better than, like, just generally speaking, than something like Conqueror. Not 100% sure. It's hard to say. Do you watch Wild Rift content creators tier list to see champions rating like S+, or you just see stats with you? We do both. Like, when we look at the content creators tier lists, we don't consider those as like actual power of the champions, right? This is like when we look at champion, the creator tier lists, or sorry, not champion creator. When we look at content creator tier lists for champions and stuff like that, we're looking to get perception value out of this, not actual power, because we know that we have the actual power, right? Like if we want to know how powerful a champion is, we can just look at our data, right? But perception is really valuable. And so keeping track of like how people perceive a champion and how content creators perceive champion power is very valuable, right? Because perception does matter, right? It's not, you know, perception matters. And so like we do want to keep tabs on that, but a content creator telling us a champion is S+ doesn't mean the champion's powerful, right? Like it just doesn't, because that's like not really correlated with win rate, right? Let's see. Will you bring a shield breaking item? Talked about it a lot before. I do want to at some point bring in Serpent's Fang. But not to say that that's like planned anytime soon, or that we even have, you know, successful or like a specific plan for it. But it's like I do want to do Serpent's Fang at some point, for sure. That'll be my next thing. I got demolished, so Serpent's Fang will be my next thing I'm working on. You know, getting added to the game. Since I already won, I got demolished. Now I have so much free time. Let's see. We saw some item leaks. Can you give info or what? I can't talk about leaks at all. Let's see. How long do you think it takes us players to pick up on patch changes? Are we like a patch behind build /rune /item wise, or do we adapt fairly quickly? It depends. There's a lot of variance. Like some things get picked up pretty quickly and some things don't get picked up at all, right? Like there's some stuff that we've seen that just never gets picked up. And then we like through systemic changes, like directly or indirectly, we like change it up. Some things just like people just never catch on to. Some things, you know, people adapt to really fast. I think there's a lot of like situational variance here where like some things are easier to catch up on. I think like general overall champion strength is typically something that players pick up on reasonably fast, like usually within 1 or 2 patches. Item optimizations and like some of the like rune and systems optimizations tend to be a little slower, and sometimes they just never get caught. So, you know, that's just how it is. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Let's see. Is 5 plates on all turrets? I saw it in the vid. Is there 5 plates on turrets?
Then if it takes him a few tries to get it.
Oh, yeah, there are. Cool. I see. I'm not sure why there's 5 plates on the turrets in this video. Someone was probably testing something, honestly. We've talked about doing plates, but no promises on doing these anytime soon or anything like that. Because, like, this is... I don't know what environment they were working in here, but, like, someone's clearly just testing something here. We test lots of different stuff internally. Like, doesn't mean anything, really. Yeah, there's just lots of testing going on. Let's see. Will the new runes replace old ones, or did you guys add... these are all additions. So this is... And if you want the full story, you can go back and watch the earlier part of the VOD where I go through the full story in one shot. I'm not going to repeat any of that stuff, but it's all new additions. Now that we have more minor runes, there's any chance in the future to be able to choose 6 instead of the current 3? There's no way we're doing 6 minor runes. That'd be insane. That's a crazy jump. That's literally doubling it. I think there's possibilities that we might want to change the system up a little bit. I think doubling the number of minor runes you pick, there's no way. That's crazy. That would be insane. Okay, let me catch up here. I'm curious about your thoughts on the current mana system in terms of what makes you bottleneck certain champions versus others. For example, you mentioned the karma you gave her support mana costs. A lot of items have mana on them randomly, while a lot of second and third pick mage items are on health/AP, which seems like part of Luden's popularity. Nothing else gives Luden stats for mana-hungry champs. Where do you see that going in the future? So we have different profiles for like supports versus like mid lane mages for mana purposes, because our expectation is that supports don't have as much gold. That's just true. We know that to be the case, which means they can't build mana as fast, right? Which means we can tax mid lane, like, which means that if we want to mana gate a champion, you know, it's different to do that for a mid lane mage versus a support enchanter or whatever, right? So that's what I was referring to when I was talking about like support versus mid lane costs, where it's like the costs need to scale harder like in the mid game if we want them to be mana gated for a mid laner, because they have more gold and therefore they can more quickly purchase something like Luden's, and they can also more reasonably purchase something like Seraphs or Rodovages if they want. Again, they have more gold, they have more access to mana earlier in the game, more mana, you know, at all basically all points in the game, etc. So that's the class differential there that we're talking about, or like not necessarily class, but like role differential. In terms of the current mana system, I think I'm pretty happy with our current level of mana gating that we have on champions, which is relatively minimal comparatively to PC. Like PC mana gates champions generally a lot harder. I do think that it is a fair criticism to say like we don't have a viable alternative to Luden's for most champions, that, or like people don't feel like they have a viable. The truth is that we do have viable alternatives to Luden's. Like both Seraphs and Awakened Soulstealer are pretty similar to Luden's and actually compete with it in pretty meaningful ways, but players don't feel like that's true for most champions. And I think that's a totally fair criticism that like maybe we should be addressing. Like, should there be another like item that's more clearly similar or more appreciably similar to Luden's in our system to get some competition there? There's also nothing wrong with Luden's being a dominant first item for mages. Like fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with it. But I think it would be good if we had some healthy competition there. And I think that's totally a fair criticism of the system. Let's see. No question, but except don't forget drink water. You're a king for answering so many questions. Thank you very much. Let's see. Brutal Rune Tip says X amount of AD/AP adaptive. So how does adaptive work? Does it give damage based on the highest damage we have, like more AD or more AP level 1? Basically, whichever one you have more of from other systems, like if you buy an Amp Tome level 1, your adaptive will be set to AP. If you buy a Longsword, it'll be set to AD. The default, I am not sure. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check our documentation about how the default works if you don't have any of either, because it is about your bonus AD, not about your base AD. So it doesn't consider your base AD, right? So like, let's suppose, you know, you have 60 base AD, that's completely discounted. Only cares about bonus AD for calculating which adaptive side is gone to. I'm not sure how it works if you have 0 of both. Like if there's a tie, I'm not sure which one wins. In PC, they have an individual system that is set for each champion. I am not aware of a system like that existing for us, but I also am not confident in saying that we don't have one. So I'm not entirely sure. My suspicion is we probably don't have a default system, and it just defaults to AD or something like that, but I'm not sure. Are 2 new Keystone runes planned because APC meta? Also really excited to see Icons meta. So the Keystones are mainly, like, the original purpose of them, like the stated, and again, you can go back and watch if you go back in the VOD and watch the discussion around, like, I went through the whole story of, like, how we got to these runes and, like, how this all happened. But the original purpose was to make, like, was to split off, like, to split off some of Conqueror's pick rate, right? It was the ticket, original Keystone, or sorry, the original ticket was literally, like, that they made to put onto me when they said they assigned this to me was, like, new Keystone for auto attackers. It's like attack Keystone, right? Like, essentially, it's like, that was the original purpose. We do think there's some value here in like, potentially making AD carries feel better about their Keystone choices and potentially bringing more AD carries into, like, maybe the competitive meta or the high MMR meta comparatively to APCs in the bot lane. Like I've said before, though, it's like, it's not our intention that it's mandatory to play an AD carry in Dragon Lane in every game, right? It's like, if that's the case, AD carries are probably OP, right? If they're mandatory in every single game, because none of the other classes are mandatory, right? It's like, you don't have to have an enchanter, you don't have to have an assassin, you don't have to have a tank, you don't have to have a fighter, right? You don't have to have a mage, right? None of the other classes are mandatory, but we do think there's, like, probably some satisfaction issues with the AD carry class and maybe some power issues too. So we'll see how this works out. Will Demolish have a cooldown? Yes, of course Demolish will have a cooldown. I don't remember. We changed it in development a couple times. I don't remember what exactly it is. I probably shouldn't even tell you if I did remember. But we changed it. It has a cooldown. I want Brutal removed from the game because most jungler has to take it for clear speed. I agree. I would also like to remove Brutal or rework it to do something else. Will Kraken have CD? No, Kraken has no cooldown. During playtest, was Echo viable in top/jungle? What about not jungle? Echo jungle definitely seemed really good to me. I didn't play it at all. Oops. Sorry, my alarm went off. That's when that's like my, you really need to get up now if you're not awake right now alarm. But I've been awake for like 3 hours at this point. Anyway, what was I answering? I'm sorry, my alarm interrupted me. Oh, Echo and Nautilus. So yeah, Echo jungle seemed really good. I don't think there was too much testing top. I'd be surprised if it was particularly good, but it might not be bad. I'm not sure. Nautilus jungle seemed functional. It didn't clear particularly fast was my perception. I didn't play it that much. I think I played it maybe I played it once or twice really early on, but I don't remember. I played it like with and against it more. It didn't seem like horrendous or anything. Do you know kind of how much damage Demolish will do? I do know exactly how much damage Demolish will do, but you'll have to find out when you read the patch notes. Have the guys behind Elemental Rift thought about making Soul be 3 dragons, but make dragons later? They have considered. Trust me, I don't think there's anything that the Elemental Rift people haven't considered, or that we haven't tested internally, or even that we want to test externally. Like, we've tested a crazy amount of stuff for Elemental Rift. Like, not to say that, like, I'm not trying to, like, shut people's suggestions down or anything like that, but it's like, just trust me, the Elemental Rift people, like Roguefool in particular, have considered an enormous number of different versions, and we have tested internally an enormous different versions. We really want to get this system right for players, right? It's like, we have tried so many different things for Elemental Rift. It's actually insane, like, how much different stuff we've tried for Elemental Rift. So, to answer the question directly, yes, that is something that has been considered and also tested. Nullifying Orb is just a generic shield. Yes, it is not magic damage only. First step when ASOL rework come out, bring him ASAP to Wild Rift. I agree. I will be pushing for that as much as I can. I don't directly have any impact on that because that would be a champions team thing, but that will definitely be something I will be arguing for sure. Let's see. Do you think y'all over-index towards split pushers, Hullbreaker, Demolish recently, or not? I see it a lot in pro play, but not much in solo queue. I think giving players the proper tools to index into split pushing is good. It is possible that these tools are too powerful, right? It's like totally possible that Hullbreaker plus Demolish will be too strong, right? And if that's the case, then we'll nerf it, right? Like, I think it is a feels good thing for certain players in solo queue. It can definitely feel bad to play against like certain types of like fast split pushing in solo queue with like Demolish and potentially, or sorry, with Hullbreaker and potentially now Demolish being added. And if that's something that players feel really bad about, I'm totally open to you know, nerfing Demolish more and making it more, or pushing it to be like, say like more in the phases of the game where people find it less frustrating, whether that means making it more scaling or more early game, whatever, right? It's like, I'm open to manipulating these systems if players find them to be really frustrating. But I think opening up more potential strategies is generally good. If players find those strategies to be extremely frustrating, then I think we should address that, but that's a separate issue, right? It's like, I generally would prefer to have more strategies viable than just grouping around objectives and winning, right? And I think players are generally aligned with that, I think. Just that some people find split pushing to be really frustrating, and that's fine, right? It's like, that's okay if you find it to be really frustrating. If a lot of people agree, then we might make some adjustments. Let's see. Thoughts on pure tanks being released because Hero Pool is too homogenized to damage dealers? I think we could definitely benefit from a few more tanks, but the truth here is just that tanks aren't that popular in Wild Rift or PC, right? The tanks we have, like, they aren't that popular. There are a few tanks that are more popular that I think we could really benefit from. I think Scion and Ornn from PC would be really good additions because they are two of the more popular tanks from PC. But, you know, no promises on adding any of that stuff. I don't even personally have any, you know, any say over what what champions or tanks or whatever that we add, right? That's all Champions team stuff. And I'm a systems and balance designer. Does Ultimate Shield scale with length of ultimate cooldown, or champs like Corki get it constantly? It has a cooldown by itself, so you cannot just proc it constantly. Let's see. Why do some champs have different AD? Wait, I already answered that question. Isn't this exactly the same question that I answered earlier? I'm just gonna disregard. I definitely answered that question earlier in the exact same text there. Let's see. How Echo Clone is level 14 when he himself is level 10 in the picture? Probably a bug, I would guess. I don't know. To clarify, Nullifying Orb also works on taking damage from AD. Yes, Nullifying Orb works against physical damage. It is not just a magic shield like it is in PC, which I argued we should call it something different, but I think that being able to borrow the icon and some of the like some of the same properties, I think it was good to like share properties, but it is a little confusing. I agree that it is not a magic damage shield, so apologies for that. I did think that might cause some confusion for PC players. I kind of have something like this via DMs. When it comes to split pushing, if the majority of the player base just doesn't take turrets, will the balanced team leave a broken in the eyes of players mechanic to push gameplay in a certain direction? So to answer this question is like, no. Like, if something is actually broken, we won't leave it in the game, no. Like, we're not going to just, like, overpower things. Like, there's a point where we can make things strong. Like, I think there's value in making things strong, but we're not going to make them overpowered, right? It's like, if, like, we're not going to fundamentally, like, upset the balance of the game. And it's like, and some of this is, you know, how do you define what is strong versus what is overpowered? And it's like, you know, there's a line somewhere, and I don't know exactly where it is, but it's like, our goal here is like, there are some situations where we might want to make things strong intentionally. Champions is not one of the ones we generally want to do this with. But it's like, there's some points where we might want to make something strong, but we're not going to intentionally overpower something to, like, you know, force players to opt into an experience or anything like that, right? It's like, strong is different than overpowered, right? Like, there's a difference between those two things. And again, you know, the line is blurry, right? It's like, you know, I don't know exactly where that line is, but it's like, our goal is not to cross the line. Thanks again for the stream and stuff. Let's keep up the good work. Have a great day. Have a great day. If you've got to head out, you know, have a good one. Yeah. See you there. What do you think about Aatrox? I think Aatrox is a cool champ. I think we could have a good time adding Aatrox. I think the difficulty with Aatrox would be figuring out how his, like, making sure that his, like, his QE combo feels good in Wild Rift. Because obviously hitting two buttons like very close together is a little more difficult in Wild Rift. It's not impossible, obviously. It's like it's totally doable. It's just it's a little more difficult. So making sure that feels good would be probably be a challenge. But I think he'd be a fine champion for Wild Rift. I think overall he'd be good. His item, thinking about it now, his itemization might be a little lacking. It's like we have Cleaver, Death Stance. He probably has enough items. Could buy Cyrilda's, maybe. Maybe he buys Divine Sunder. His itemization might be a little lacking in Wild Rift, I think. It's probably not that bad, though. Let's see. What are your thoughts on Shen's current energy regen? I want to fix it to make it the same as everyone else. Just like I want to make Akali's the same as everyone else. I would like to make all the energy regen champs have the same energy regen so that the system makes sense. That's my plan. Let's see. Are you aware of FPS drops issues? Yes, we're aware of FPS drops. I don't know. Like, that is literally nothing to do with me. I don't know anything about it. I know nothing about it. I'm aware of it. I don't know anything about it. It has nothing to do with me. This is not the place to talk about that. Sorry. I don't know anything about it other than that they're happening and that people are looking into it. I could not tell you if or when it'll be fixed or anything about that. No, nothing. I don't know anything. Nothing. Heimerdinger and Wild Rift. Someone else was saying that earlier, unless you're the same person who was asking for Heimerdinger and Wild Rift. Basically what I was saying is, like, there's nothing about Heimerdinger that doesn't seem doable. It's just, if we want to do a pet champion like Heimerdinger or Yorick or Zyra or whatever, we would need to figure out how the rules for targeting the player created minions work. Because we'd probably need to readdress our targeting rules, which would be some work for sure. Not like work that we couldn't do. It's just like that'd be definitely like a conversation and something we'd have to test a lot for sure to make sure that's good. Let's see. Oh, I could actually go to my stream questions doc. Will Samira be doable in Wild Rift? Yeah, I don't see any reason why Samira wouldn't be doable. We'd want to make sure that she's not as frustrating as like the original PC version for sure. But yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. Would that apply to Malzahar as well with his Voidlings? It would, yeah. Although I think there's an argument that we could just make a version of Malzahar that doesn't have Voidlings. Like, they're not really essential to his play pattern at all. But I think they're a nice thematic win, so it's like we'd probably want to keep them if we could, right? So, yeah. But that, like, all the pet champion stuff would apply to Malz for sure. As well as Elise, Yorick, etc., right? Like, all the champions that spawn pets. Like, spawn, like, a bunch of pets, right? Obviously, it's a little different with, like, Annie and Tibbers. Which would be the same thing for like Ivern and Daisy. Those are like a little different because it's just one thing and it's actually like a gameplay relevant, entity. So it's like we don't really have to change the targeting rules for them because you actually want to target Tibbers sometimes, right? Like, etc. Let's see. Okay. Any chance of porting PC Conk to Wild Rift or just changing Conk and Wild Rift in any ways? There's a good chance we change Conqueror. We'll see how it shakes out after the addition of Lethal Tempo and Kraken Slayer, but we definitely are talking about potentially making changes to Conqueror after we see what happens and, potentially making it, have a more clear niche. Because right now, like the version of Conqueror that currently exists in Wild Rift is intentionally insanely generic because the people who designed it knew that it had to carry the weight of basically every sustained damage character, right? Every fighter, every ADC, right? They knew that it would be carrying the weight there. So it has to be really generic to be able to carry all these different champions. Now that we have some different keystones that can share some of that space, it can be a little more, specific, more tailored towards the champions that we want it to be on. So that's something we'll talk about in the future for sure. How about targeting rules for Shaco or LB's clone? That'd be a little more complicated as well. Something we'd have to talk about. Are you going to watch WREC today? I'll probably try and catch up with the VOD. If it's still going when I'm done streaming, I'll definitely watch, like, open it up. I'd like to watch it. It's just, I would prefer not to stream at the same time as, like, WREC, so I could just watch it. But unfortunately, my time is kind of limited, and this is, like, one of the only good slots I had to stream, like, good time slots I had to stream, was just to, like, get up early and stream today. So, unfortunately, time is limited, and I don't always have the most options. Let's see. Let me get back to the questions, or get to the questions in the doc, because I do want to talk about these very briefly. So I'll read the question off here. So, but may I ask why Athene's only gorilla has MR on it? I have no clue why an item that has should reward supports for doing damage has 900 gold worth of defensive stats, which makes that a much worse champion that would love the fantasy like Nami and Karma. So, number one, I couldn't tell you. Like, I honestly could not tell you what the original reason why Athene's has MR on it, because the item comes from PC, right? And the original version from PC was made in like 2013 or something like that. I have no idea who made the item. I have no idea what their original motivation was for putting MR on it, right? And it obviously has had a bunch of different iterations, and at any one of those points, the MR could have been taken off from it, right, in PC. And then same thing when it was ported into Wild Rift, right? I couldn't tell you what the original motivation for the MR was, because I don't know. I don't know who designed it. I don't know who did that. What I can tell you is that the good thing that the MR does is it makes Athene's a more contextual purpose, and that was kind of why it was maintained like this in PC for so long, was like, oh, this is a contextual purpose that allows us to have a MR item for enchanters, so that if they're getting blown up by like a LeBlanc or something like that, they have an item that they can buy in this space. Now, I think there's a relevant question you could ask here of like, did that actually work? And the answer is like, no, it didn't. Right. And in Wild Rift today, you can see this kind of same thing where it's like, you know, if you're being blown up by like a Ziggs or a Brand or whatever, I don't think that makes you super invested into Athenes. I mean, obviously it makes it literally better in that game, but it's like, I don't think people really associate it as like the MR, you know, enchanter item, right? So like from that perspective, I think it doesn't work that well. The big thing that the MR gets us here is more so that because it makes the item more niche, the unique passive can be more powerful and thus a little more appreciable, which still fails, right? Like still not that great. So overall, essentially the like TLDR here is like the MR does some good things and it does some bad things. But if we made the item more generic, like if we took the Negatron Cloak out and we said this builds out of like a Codex or like a Giant's Belt or whatever, we'd have to nerf the passive, right? The fact that it's niche means the passive can be less powerful, or sorry, the passive can be more powerful. And it's already a low satisfaction passive. I think we're way more likely to rework the item or remove it and replace it with something else than we are to just change the build path. This is an item that, unlike Stormrazor, I think, the stats are not fundamentally the problem with the item. I think there's a problem with satisfaction on the item, unfortunately, more so than the stats, right? So it's like, this is an item that I don't look at and say like, oh, I'll just change the stats on this and it'll be perfect. I look at this item and I'm like, I want to replace it or like significantly change what it does. And Roguefool has actually put up several reworks internally. I think two different versions, I believe. But my personal opinion was like, I think we should just replace the item. But like, generally speaking, I just think it's not great. Let me catch up a little bit on chat here. Something about Singed. Is Singed the most balanced champ? No. No, he is not. He is not even close to the most balanced champ. Not being changed definitely does not indicate that you are the most balanced champion. It just means that there's some compelling reason why we don't want to change him. One of which is that players would be furious if we nerf Singed, but he's generally quite strong. He very frequently gets quite close to the line at which we would have to nerf him due to him being like over our ban rate or over our win rate threshold. It's not ban rate; he is never banned, but he's quite strong. He is not the most balanced champ for sure. But like using this champion never gets changed as your metric of most balanced champion doesn't really make that much sense, right? Like that just means you're like the champion that interacts least with the systems, basically, is what that means. Because if you get changed the least, that means that other external forces aren't constantly causing you to have, aren't constantly like changing you, right? It's like the fact that Yasuo needs systemic adjustments whenever crit is changed most of the time, like that doesn't mean that he's less balanced. That just means that he's very, very heavily system based, right? Like that means that he's very heavily tied to the crit item system, right? And that's intentional in his design, right? He's supposed to be tied to the crit item system. But that also means that he's more work to balance. That doesn't mean that he's less balanced. That just means that you have to do more work to make sure that he stays balanced because the system has such a large impact on his power and his like the way that the champion plays, right? So with Pyke's execute mechanics, do you think Collector could come in game? I don't think the two are really connected at all, but definitely I think Collector is an item that we could possibly do in the future. Do you think Kayle is good right now? I do think Kayle is good right now, and I think she'll probably be better with these new keystones. I think Lethal Tempo and Kraken should definitely both be better than Conqueror. I suspect she'll eventually end up on Kraken, but we'll see. Lethal Tempo might end up being better, I'm not sure. We will see. Any thoughts on AP assassins like Katarina and Akali abusing DD and Divine Sunder? I'm pretty sure that's PC specific. I mean, I'd have to check, but there's not like the reasons why those things are good on them in PC aren't actually true in Wild Rift, right? Like Katarina doesn't have on hits in Wild Rift. She can't apply Divine Sunder a bunch with her, with her Shunpo and her ultimate, right? It's like, they both have AD ratios, right? But it's like their AD ratios are, they're fine. It's like maybe Death Stance might be good on Akali. It's like I don't actually know. I'd have to take a deep dive into the data, but it's like I doubt those items are actually better than the other options. Like realistically speaking, I'd have to do a deeper dive. But it's like it hasn't showed up as something that's a problem for us. But I should probably take a deeper look into it. It's like not something I have a ton of knowledge about. Do you agree the game would use more genuine AP Baron laners right now the full pills limited? Ken and Akali, I guess AP Malphite. I think Mordekaiser and Gwen from PC could be good for Flink's role. Yes, I agree. I mean, that's part of the reason why Gwen was made, right? Like Gwen was literally made in PC because they don't even have enough options, right? And it's like, I think we certainly could use more AP Baron laners for sure. 100% agreed. I think Champions agrees as well, although I don't know if they have any plans to do anything about it. Are there changes that are not listed in the patch notes? Action Swing is so awkward on his release and it got better every patch, but there are no mentions of it. There are sometimes changes that slip by the patch notes. For example, there was a targeting change in 3.1 that didn't make it in for some reason. Usually that's oversight. I'm not sure if anything was actually changed with Action Swing, but it is sometimes the case that stuff slips by the patch notes, but it's accidental. It's like our intention to capture everything in the patch notes so that we can. That's like gameplay relevant. So if we did make significant changes to Swing, it probably should have been in the patch notes. Why not give PD some AD so that it's not a terrible buy? I kind of agree. I could see us doing a version of Phantom Dancer that has AD on it. I do think that like pretty clearly the Zeal item AS crit only version of Phantom Dancer is not fulfilling its purpose as like the defensive AD carry item, right? Like the fact that it has Lifeline is like there's just not that many champions that can afford to fit Phantom Dancer into their build. I think that just clearly is not working out for them. So I think there's some like it would be pretty reasonable for us to change stuff. It's like it's not that it's a terrible buy though. It's that the stats it gives are too narrow to fit into most AD carry builds, right? Not that it's bad, right? Like this is different than an item just being weak, right? This is different from Stormrazor, where the item both had a terrible build path and also the item was just weak, right? It's like it was both with Stormrazor. Phantom Dancer is just one, where it's like the stats are too narrow for most AD carries to fit into. They just put Singed and Nasus and WREC got to switch streams. I respect that. I will definitely be watching that stream or watching that game later. I'm interested in seeing a Singed Nasus game. Should we see movement speed buff to some champions soon? I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean just like you want champions to have more movement speed or what? Gwen for Wild Rift needs some AP Baron laners. I would love to do Gwen. I was the game analysis owner on Gwen for PC, so I actually shipped that champion on PC. I worked on her quite a bit, so I would love to see Gwen. What do you think of Gangplank? Can't think of doing his I can't imagine doing his barrel combos on a phone. I think so. I've suggested this before to Champs team of like I've just like randomly had this thought of like the barrel combos would be a lot easier if the barrel placement automatically snaps to the edge of the closest barrel that you have, so that only the first barrel is like actually a true XY vector cast. If that makes sense, like XY location cast, I guess I should say, not XY vector, because that doesn't actually make sense. And then once you have the first barrel, you can then, essentially snap the other barrels to the edge of that barrel. I think that's probably at least a way it could work. I don't know if people on the Champs team have other ideas of like how we would make it work if we did Gangplank, but that's my thought on like how we could make that work. Any chances of system change where you can do multiple button pressing at the same time? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that's baked pretty hard into the way that we have our system, like that you're not allowed to do 2 inputs per server tick. But I am not 100% sure about that. That's be something that'd have to be a question for an engineer who understands the system better. Also, Insub, can you please VOD this stream to watch it later? Because I came late and want to retrace my own comments. Yes, I don't have any intentions of taking this VOD down or anything like that. It's like all my streams, with one exception, have the VOD up. So if you want to watch them later. There's only one stream where that was an exception. Unfortunately, ran into some issues. Probably shouldn't talk about. But yeah, one stream had one VOD had to be disabled. Or unpublished, or whatever the proper term is. Shen feels funky to play gameplay-wise. Can we update his ult to match how target selection is for Galio? It's interesting because I've actually heard the opposite comment from many people asking for Galio to be more like Shen. So, not something I'm an expert on. But I have seen more comments in the opposite direction. I'd love to see Eclipse and Wilder someday. I don't know if I'm just coping hard. I think Eclipse is a reasonable item. We'd probably have to cut some features off. Like, you know, it does so many things in PC, and not all of them are satisfying. And partially that is because it has the power budget of a Mythic. It's like, I think we'd probably want to cut like the damage off the item, maybe not the AD, the like actual on proc damage, and just make it about the shield for the proc. But it's like, I think it's a reasonable item we could do. 3.1 BVOD, yes, the 3.1 BVOD, that is the one. Isn't Gragas ult too fast? Interestingly, that's a discussion we've had. I believe the current, I forget how many frames of travel time the current one is, but it's like, we were literally talking about how in the early days of Wild Rift, people felt like his ult was too slow. So it was buffed by 2 frames. And then we were like, is it too fast? Should we nerf it by 1 frame? And then we were like, is that even noticeable? Like, we've had some debates about Gragas ult and like, is it 1 frame too fast? Because we know that 2 frames slower than the current version is probably too slow. It's possible that we need to go in the middle, like we need to meet in the middle here and do like a, you know, a 1 frame nerf. It's possible that it's too fast. I'm not sure. It's not something we've talked about super recently, but it's something we were talking about a lot, late last year and like I think even early this year, about like what is the right number of frames of travel time for Gragas Ultimate. It's a pretty sensitive number, to be fair, right? It might sound like 1 frame is like, you know, 1 frame is nothing or whatever, but it's like it makes a lot of difference with that powerful of a spell, right? And it does make it feel a lot more like even 1 frame can be a lot of change in responsiveness. Thank you, Anseb. I appreciate it. And yeah, the 3.1B stream you never see. Yeah, I did that one live, and if you were there live, you saw it. But it's like I had to disable the VOD for unfortunate reasons. Are folks afraid of Kennen 2.0 release if Fiddle ever came to Wild Rift? No. Kennen being OP has really nothing to do with any other champion's release. I don't really consider that release as meaningful in any way for other champion releases, so I don't really even think about it at all. Do you think something unique like jungle stacks would make people want to jungle more? I'm not sure what you mean by jungle stacks, but we do think that there is probably something, like, there's probably some improvements to be made in the jungle for sure. We're actually just looking at like jungle play rate yesterday in a meeting as like something we want to improve. Should Camille coming back to jungle? I don't really think we want Camille in the jungle. I think that's caused us a lot of problems, and I think the gameplay is kind of questionable. So generally, I think we'd prefer to preserve Camille as a Baron laner above all else, and make her jungle as poor, as weak as possible. I am going to cut off the stream here soon. I'll run for another 8 minutes, do a 3-hour stream, and then I'm going to head out to go to work, or to get to work. I'm actually going to stay here because I have people coming to repair my ceiling. But yeah, I do need to get to work soon, or start working soon. Not physically travel to work until later in the day. But yeah, I'll definitely be back for the patch notes, which isn't too far from now. So I'm going to cut off the stream soon here. You get stacks off camps like C's. Oh, you're talking about conservation. Or, oh wait, are you talking about Feral Flare? No, I don't think we'd want to go down the direction of Feral Flare. Doing like dedicated carry jungling, I don't think is something we're super interested in. Like, one of the things that is like different about Wild Rift comparatively to other mobile MOBAs, right, is like that we don't have exclusively dedicated carries in the jungle, right? Where in other games, the expectation in a lot of mobile MOBAs, right, not necessarily all of them, but it's like the way that the design of the jungle naturally shapes is that if jungle has similar or better, like similar income to lanes, it is the safest place to put your carry, right? But that doesn't actually make sense in terms of the game overall, because that's the hardest place to attack, like, to attack a carry. So it's like if the jungle is the carry role, it becomes like the game is weird because it becomes, okay, the enemy carry is the most inevitable player on their team. Like, that doesn't really make sense from the perspective of like tuning the carry champions. That means that you have to like try and build in specific counterplay to these champions as, you know, late game carries into their kits. It's really not something we want to do, right? So it's like, and we prefer the jungle be open to multiple different types of champions. And it's okay if a champion like Jax goes in the jungle as a late game, you know, scaling hyper carry or whatever. That's fine. But we don't want that to be the exclusive thing that the role is about. So we don't want to do stuff like Feral Flare in that space. I want to say great job on the recent patches. Many of my friends have come back to Wild Rift, and I seriously can't wait for this next one. Got a few of my PC friends to join me on the Rift. Love to hear it. Yeah, I'm super hyped about this patch. I'm super hyped about, honestly, like, the next few patches. Like, I'm really, really hyped about 3.2. I've been hyped about this patch for a long time. I've been super, super hyped about seeing, people's reactions, and I've been really happy to see, people talking about how great a patch it is, and that's been super validating for all my work on the runes from my side. And, like, obviously, the other teams, working on the stuff like Remake, etc., like, all that stuff is great. But for me, it's like I worked really hard on these runes. Like, I put a lot of hours into these runes. It has been really awesome to be validated on, and all that time I spent. So, thank you very much. What champ do you think would be a hot pick next patch? I'd love to try Pyke mid and full AP not mid. What was the thing? I had a lot of fun playing Kraken Slayer Akshan in tests. That was really fun. Pretty much everywhere. I played it in tests. I played it as Dragon Lane carry. I played it Baron Lane, and I played it mid. I was having a blast playing Kraken Akshan. It's looking like it may be the best single patch to date. Love to hear that. By the way, the website doesn't show when future updates will be released. Will it get updated soon when patch goes live next week? I am not sure how the website gets updated, but hopefully yes. Yes, Akshan's my main, so excited. Yeah, I really liked Kraken Akshan. I didn't try Lethal Tempo Akshan at all, but I'd be interested to see if that's actually worth doing. It's probably decent, I would guess. But Kraken felt really good for me on him. Time for the return of my Manamune Akshan. Thanks for the stream. Take care. Bloodless. Thanks for your work. Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm gonna give you here. I'll give you. I'm gonna put a line in the chat in a couple seconds here, and then I will cut off there. Oh, actually, hold on. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna here. All right, this is my cutoff line. Trist mid might actually be good with Kraken Slayer. Yeah, it might be. I'll answer these last two questions I have in the doc because I forgot I actually never got to these. So this will take me a few minutes to get through these, but I'm not gonna answer more questions from the chat. And so no more questions. Here, I'll put this back up. Oh, wait, you can't even see it. Oh, that's terrible. How do I... Background color. That did not work. Okay, whatever. Well, you'll just have to... Whatever. I don't worry about it. Anyway, don't worry about it. Anyway, I'm going to answer these questions, and then I'm going to head out. So starting out with the first one, does the balance team ever attempt to proactively shape the game? Okay, so we talked about this a little bit earlier because Straight Conan was here. Yeah. So yeah, I talked about this a little bit earlier. It's like, same answer. It's like, we do try and sometimes shape the game here where, like, we sometimes will intentionally make things like stronger or weaker. I think the best example of this from PC, which we haven't had a good opportunity for yet, was like the best example of like how we can use power to shape perception is like, PC did this with Samira, where Samira shipped, she was both OP and also insanely frustrating, right? So they knew that they wouldn't probably be able to get people to dissociate those two things at the same time. So what they did first was they nerfed her, and they nerfed her into the ground to the point where she was very clearly weak, even if the mechanics were still frustrating, to kind of let players see that she was weak. And I believe they left her there for like 1 or 2 patches. And then they changed the mechanics to make her less frustrating. She's still weak, less frustrating mechanics. Then she gets buffed, and then, okay, frustration problem mostly resolved, right? She's still a somewhat frustrating champion, but she's not nearly like a like actual outlier or extreme outlier in terms of frustration. I think that's the type of thing where we can really benefit from using powers, like actually like nerf, like if something is really frustrating, like actually nerfing it into the ground and then fixing the mechanics and then buffing it up. It's like that process I think works really, really, really well for resolving frustration issues. So that's the most like. That's a situation where we haven't had this come up too much for us, really, like where we need to do this type of thing. But that's the area where we're most likely to be manipulating power to like manipulate like the way that players perceive the game. In terms of like shaping the game, though, like the way that we actually shape the game more frequently is stuff like Stormrazor, right? It's like Stormrazor is one of the stronger items in the game, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's like, and maybe we need to nerf it now that AD carries have keystones, right? It's like that's possible, right? So, but it's like, it was one of the stronger items in the game for a while, and there was nothing wrong with that. It was helping out AD carries. It was increasing AD carry item diversity overall. And so that's more how we're like more inclined to shape the game in terms of how we're going to, like, we can make things that are strong, that are good for the game. We're not going to make things that are OP, right? Sort of intentionally, right? That's not something we're going to do. As far as the like last line here, is it done by other Wild Rift devs? It's like no, because other Wild Rift devs don't really deal with the actual systems in the game, right? It's like Systems and Balance essentially owns the live gameplay of the game, right? And so other Wild Rift devs don't really have the opportunity to do something like this. 10 out of 10 answer. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much. Glad to hear it's 10 out of 10. Second question, last question I want to get to before I close out the stream. What are your thoughts on Jinx and Caitlyn places in the game? I feel like Caitlyn is just a more stable and less explosive version of Jinx because most of her skill checks from PC are not here. Is there a chance she can get her auto resets after receiving the rework? So, first question first. I don't really consider Caitlyn and Jinx to be similar at all. It's interesting to me that someone would consider them to be similar because when I look at them, I look at this and like, it's possible my perception here is warped a little bit as a longtime PC player, right? Where PC does have, different phases of the game, etc. But it's like, when I look at Caitlyn, I see this is the best in class zone control marksman, right? Her traps are best in class zone control for marksman. It is not close, right? She is an early game champion, right? She is a lane dominant U-shaped power curve champion where she has a very good early game. Her mid game is not particularly good. And then she kind of spikes up a little bit later with 3-4 plus items. But she's not really a great late game carry. She's self-sufficient, right? Her best synergies are with mage supports and tank supports, where you can just frag out your lane and snowball the map, right? She loves doing objectives, right? She's all about setting up at objectives and sticking around these objectives, setting up zone control, and winning the game by playing around tower sieges and neutral objectives, etc. Right? That's kind of how I look at Caitlyn as these are the things that these are her skill tests, these are her unique strengths, etc. When I look at Jinx, I look at her and I say, this is a scaling hyper carry who has a weak laning phase, who is one of the best synergizing champions with enchanter supports, who needs a lot of, very, very team dependent, needs a lot of help from her team, but has the 1v9 carry, or the I guess the 5v5 carry potential, right? She's a team fighter. She doesn't care where the team fight is, right? She's just about team fighting. She's about 5v5ing, and she's about getting that first kill, getting that reset, and popping off in team fights, right? To me, those are very, very different places in the game, very, very different strategic niches. And yeah, from the perspective of these champions have long auto attack range in their 80 carries, I guess they're similar in that way. But to me, their places in the game are very fundamentally different. So it's sort of strange for me to hear that someone thinks that they're similar in terms of their place in the game, because I think they're so different in terms of what their purpose is and what they actually do in the game, if that makes sense. As for most of Caitlyn's skill checks in PC not being there, I'd also disagree with that, right? It's when I think of Caitlyn's skill checks, I think of things like optimal trap placement, use of your net, maximizing of your headshots on enemy champions rather than minions, snowballing out of your lane, positioning, right? You have really long auto attack range. She has much more freedom of positioning than other 80 carries, right? These are the things that I think of as Caitlyn's skill checks. And the resets from PC don't even really enter into my mind. Keep in mind, PC doesn't have hard resets anymore. It has soft resets, which are not the same as the old versions, right? The stuff that Saber popularized in NA. And to be clear about what a good skill check is here, right? Let me give you an example. I love this example. I've used it before on stream, but not in a long time. So probably most people here haven't heard it before. It's here's an example of a skill check that I could add to the game. Let's suppose on Ezreal's Mystic Shot, I make it so that when you type EZ in the chat, as your Mystic Shot is in the air, it turns red and it does 20% more damage. This is a skill test, right? This is a skill check. Is this a good skill check? Well, let's think about how we judge a skill test, right? What about it makes it good? Well, this is certainly something that's hard to do, right? It's something that new players won't be able to maximize properly, and you will get better at over time, right? So from the perspective of mastery, it's yeah, it passes the mastery bar here for a skill test, right? How about communication, right? Is this something that is communicated well to the enemies and to the player, that they understand they did something properly and the enemies understand that this was a skill test their opponent had to pass? Yeah, I mean, you can see the easy in the chat. Let's say we could even make it all chat if we really wanted to make it communicatable to allies and enemies to make sure everyone in the game can recognize this skill test. It's really good from this perspective of yeah, it's a good skill test from determining, everyone knows that you passed the skill test, right? It turns red. Everyone can see the easy in the all chat, etc., right? So it's good there, right? So it's probably a good skill test, right? It's like, no, obviously it's absolutely terrible, right? Like, obviously this is nonsense, right? And there's two big reasons why it violates this. Number one, obviously on top of just being completely ridiculous mechanics, like this is just not something we don't want player to interact with the chat to increase their damage. Like that part aside, right? Number one, it's always optimal, right? It's always correct to type easy and like always correct to do 20% bonus damage, right? And it's like mechanics that are always optimal, they aren't really generally going to be good skill tests, right? One of the cool things about last hitting as a skill test is that part of the skill test in last hitting is that it's not always correct to last hit, right? Sometimes it's better to go for a trade or for a roam or whatever, right? It's not always correct to just sit in lane and last hit every single minion, right? Part of the skill test in last hitting is not just the mechanical skill test, but the intellectual skill test of, do you actually try this mechanic here or not, right? Do you actually try and go into this mechanical test? Whereas the Ezreal Q thing is like, there's no intellectual skill test here. It's always better to do 20% more damage, right? So there's no intellectual part to this skill test. It's only mechanical. Pure mechanical skill tests do have a place, but not really on, you know, not really on this type of mechanic, right? On like a Caitlyn trap or something like that, especially if it's not communicated well. One of the reasons one of the things I actually dislike about Riven in PC is that the animation cancels have this problem on her Q where they're always correct to do, right? It's always correct to cancel Riven's Q animation. So it's purely just a mechanical skill test, right? It's not an intellectual skill test. But at the same time, there's some value in this, and like fighting games do a lot of this where they have what I would call like meaningless mechanical difficulty, right? Where it doesn't actually have any intellectual context on when you would do these things. It's just always correct. Some of these things can be good, right? If they're in the right place. But a good example of another one that I think is like really, truly terrible for the game is like L canceling in Smash Melee. For anyone who's like a big Melee player, it's like there's a mechanic in Melee where if you tap the L button right before you land on the ground, if you're in the air, you actually recover faster. It's always correct to do, and this is like a point of mastery. It does make the game harder, but it doesn't make the game harder in an interesting way where there's like some context around this decision. It's right. It's always correct to do this because it just gives you better recovery, right? Anyway, to speak specifically about Caitlyn here, the places where this is failing are, number one, this stuff is not communicated well to anyone ever, right? The trap auto resets are not communicated, and the part where you get insta bursted because you got locked in a trap or you got netted or whatever, communication here that Caitlyn passed a skill check to do this is not there. So from that perspective, it's a really bad skill test, right? No one understands what happened here. And so like, because the comprehensibility is basically zero, it would be way better to have the skill test somewhere else, right? Number two, it's always correct to do this, right? It's always correct to like just chain burst people off these mega auto resets if you can. So there's no intellectual skill test here, right? It's always best to just opt into the like Omega reset chain if you can. And there's also a third thing here where Caitlyn is the highest base range, best in class zone control marksman. If she's also best in class burst, which by the way, the best version of these resets, right? The original version of these resets the PC had, she was actually the best burst marksman. That is not a strength that her kit can actually support, which means that if we wanted to tune around this, then we would naturally have to take power out of other parts of the kit that players are likely to appreciate more, right? So there's just like a lot of issues with the auto, like the resets from PC, right? Like that's essentially why we don't, like why PC removed them and they have just the soft versions for feels purposes. Now, if your argument here is like, oh, I think they just feel good or whatever, and it's not about the skill test, it's like, yeah, I think there's probably some work that could be done around making the headshot resets feel a little better for Caitlyn. But it's like, that would mostly be feel stuff, not actually allowing you to like triple headshot someone back to back and insta kill them, right? It's like, that stuff's obviously unacceptable in terms of just burst threshold, etc. Yeah, anyway, that's the last question I was going to answer. And hopefully that's a satisfactory answer for everybody. But yeah, hope everybody liked the stream. I think I'm going to cut it here and go grab something to eat and then start working. Because it is a little bit overdue for me to start getting to work here. So anyway, thanks to everyone who stopped by and was asking questions and all that. Great time. How do you talk for so long? I appreciate the stream. Well, I have a lot of water. That's how I do it. Yeah, so hope everybody has a good one. And here, I'll let's see, /raid Well, let's go. Let's raid the WREC English channel. Anyway, thanks for the views and the stopping by, and I will send you guys over to WREC, and you can check that out. I have no idea what's going on there because I don't have the stream open, but have a good one, everybody, and catch you next time if you want to.
Pick as well, and I feel like there's just so many strong champions at the moment in Wild Rift that even though you get that first pick on blue side, I think you can just counter that with 2 other counter picks, and then like I said, that last pick is the crucial thing, which came up important in this game with that Renekton on Acolyte.
Yeah, absolutely, because